everyone in the Sweetgrass Valley agreed that Lucas Carroll would die alone. The scarred, silent rancher on the far ridge, the man whose burned face made children hide behind their mothers' skirts and grown folks cross to the other side of the street, had no wife, no friends, and no future anyone could see but a lonely grave. They'd written him off years ago, the whole valley, a frightening, broken hermit, best avoided, certain to end his days as bitter and alone as they imagined he'd live them. Every soul in the Sweetgrass believed it, and every soul in the Sweetgrass was wrong, because not one of them had ever once bothered to look past the scars to the man underneath, until a widow named Rachel Wren did. To understand what the valley saw when it looked at Lucas Carroll, you have to understand the fire. And to understand the man, you have to understand what the valley never let itself learn about that fire at all. 11 years before, Lucas Carroll had been a different man entirely, young, well-liked, newly married to a girl named Ellen, whom he loved past all reason, building a life on the Carroll place with a whole bright future ahead of him. And then, one black winter night, the house caught fire. It went up fast, the way frame houses did, and Lucas got out. But Ellen did not. And Lucas Carroll, hearing his wife screaming inside the burning house, did the only thing a man who loves that way can do. He went back in after her, into the flames. He fought through fire to reach her, burning as he went, and he could not get to her in time, and the roof came down, and he was dragged out at the last moment by neighbors more dead than alive himself. His wife lost, and his face and his hands and half his body burned so terribly that the doctor did not expect him to survive the week. He survived. That was, in its way, the cruelest part. He survived to bury Ellen, and he survived horribly scarred, his face seamed and ruined down one side, his hands twisted with old burns, and he survived into a grief so total that there were no words for it, and so he simply stopped using words at all. That was the silence. It had not always been there. Lucas Carroll had gone quiet the way a man goes quiet when speaking has nothing left to offer him, when he's lost the one person he most wanted to speak to, and when every other person he meets now flinches at the sight of his face, because that was what the world gave Lucas Carroll after the fire, the flinch. Year after year, every encounter the same, the quick, involuntary recoil, the eyes that slid away, the children who cried, the mothers who pulled them close, the conversations that ended before they began. A man can only be looked at like a monster so many thousands of times before he stops giving the world the chance. So Lucas withdrew, year by year, up onto the far ridge into his work and his silence, until he became to the Sweetgrass Valley not a grieving widower who'd run into fire for love, but simply the scarred man, a thing to be feared and avoided, a recluse, a frightening figure half the children believed was hardly human at all. And the bitterest irony, the thing the valley never let itself understand, was this. The scars they recoiled from were the most beautiful thing about him. That ruined face was not the mark of a monster. It was the mark of the single bravest, most loving act any man in the Sweetgrass had ever performed. A man who had walked into fire for the woman he loved and carried the proof of it on his skin for the rest of his life. The valley looked at Lucas Carroll's face and saw something to fear. They never once let themselves see what it actually was. A monument to love, written in scars. And beneath the silence, the man himself had never changed. That was the other thing nobody knew. Lucas Carroll was still, under all of it, the good and gentle man he'd been before the fire. And he proved it, year after year, in the only way a man the world won't look at, in secret. It was Lucas who left cut firewood, anonymously, by the doors of struggling families in the hardest part of winter. It was Lucas who, riding his fence lines, would quietly mend a neighbor's broken gate and never mention it. It was Lucas who pulled stranded travelers out of the spring mud and was gone before they could see his face to thank or fear it. The valley that had written him off as a bitter hermit was, without ever knowing it, the quiet beneficiary of the kindest heart in the Sweetgrass, a man who went on loving a world that recoiled from him, asking nothing, expecting nothing, and getting nothing in return but more flinching. Then Rachel Wren came to the valley. She was a widow of about 40, who'd lost her husband back east and come west with her small savings to take a hardscrabble place in the Sweetgrass and start over. A quiet, steady, plain-spoken woman who had known her own share of grief and had no patience for cruelty or for foolishness. and being new, she did not know the valley's long habit of fearing Lucas Caro. She had not spent 11 years learning to flinch. It was a hard first winter, and Rachel, alone and inexperienced on her new place, would not have made it through without help she didn't understand. Firewood appeared by her door when her own ran short. A fence she'd given up on was mended in the night, and one terrible night, when a late blizzard caught her stock out, and she went floundering into the storm to save them and got lost herself, half frozen and sinking down in the snow to die. It was a big, silent man on a horse who loomed up out of the whiteout, got her up, got her stock in, got her home and warm, and was gone again before she'd rightly seen him. She knew only that someone had saved her life, and that it was the same someone who'd been quietly keeping her alive all winter. So Rachel Wren did what no one in the sweetgrass had done in 11 years. She went to find out who, and to thank him. It took some asking, and the answers came wrapped in warnings. "Oh, that'll be the scarred man, the Caro recluse. You stay clear of him, he's not right, that face. You don't want to go up there." And Rachel listened to all of it, and went up the ridge anyway, because a person who saves your life and asks nothing has earned a thank you to his face, whatever that face looks like. She rode up to the Caro place and found Lucas at his work, and when he turned and she saw the ruined, scarred face the whole valley had warned her about, Rachel Wren did the thing that changed both their lives. She did not flinch. She'd braced herself a little the way you do, but when it came to it, looking at the scarred, silent man who'd hauled her out of a blizzard, Rachel Wren simply looked him square in the eye, the way you look at any person, and said, "You're the one who's been helping me all winter, the firewood, the fence. And you pulled me out of that storm and saw to my stock and never stayed to be thanked. I've come to thank you. I'd likely be dead 3 times over if not for you, and I'll not have it go unsaid just because you're shy of company." Lucas Caro stood absolutely still, because in 11 years no one, not one living soul, had looked him full in the face without flinching, and spoken to him like a man, and thanked him as though he were a person, and not a thing to be feared. The flinch was the wall the whole world had built between him and every other human being for 11 years, and this plain, steady widow had just walked straight through it as though it weren't there at all. He opened his mouth, and found he'd half forgotten how to use his own voice, and what came out was rusty and low. "Wasn't anything," he managed. "Couldn't leave a neighbor to freeze." "Most folks could and would," Rachel said. "You didn't. That tells me more about you than any face could." And she meant it so plainly, so utterly without performance, that something in Lucas Caro that had been frozen for 11 years cracked, very quietly, right down the middle. That was the beginning. Rachel took to coming up the ridge. To return the kindness, she said. A meal cooked for a man who clearly cooked little for himself, a bit of company for a man starved of it longer than she knew. And Lucas, who had not let another person near him in over a decade, found himself, against every armored instinct, letting this one in, because Rachel Wren never once flinched. She looked at his face and saw his face and looked past it to him, and treated the scarred, silent recluse as exactly what he was underneath, a good, gentle, lonely, grieving man. And under that simple, steady seeing, Lucas Caro began, slowly, to come back to life. He began to talk, haltingly at first, the unused voice rough, and then more. 11 years of silence thawing in the warmth of someone who wanted to hear him. And Rachel, listening, came to know the man the valley had thrown away. The dry, quiet humor still alive under the grief, the deep gentleness, the goodness that had kept him secretly tending a valley that feared him. She came to know all of it, and in time, inevitably, she came to love him, not in spite of the scars, but seeing the man so clearly that the scars simply became part of the face of someone dear. She learned the truth of those scars, too, one evening when he finally told her about Ellen and the fire, about running back into the flames for the woman he loved, about failing, about the burns and the loss and the 11 years of silence after. And when Rachel Wren understood that the ruined face the whole valley recoiled from was the mark of a man who had walked into fire for love, she wept, not in pity, but in a kind of fury at the blindness of people that they could look at the bravest, most loving thing a man ever did and see only something to fear. "They flinch from the proof that you loved someone enough to burn for her," she said. holding his scarred hand in both of hers. 11 years they've recoiled from the best thing about you. Lucas, that face isn't something to hide. It's the truest face I've ever seen. It's the face of a man who loves all the way down to the bone. I only wish the whole valley could see what I see when I look at you. The valley, of course, was scandalized when it became known that the decent widow Wren was keeping company with the scarred man on the ridge. There was gossip, and there were warnings, and there was no small cruelty. Folks who told Rachel to her face that she was a fool, that she could do better than a broken recluse, that there was something wrong with a woman who'd take up with that face. And Rachel Wren, who had no patience for cruelty, gave it back plain. That Lucas Caro was twice the man any of them were, that he'd been quietly keeping half of them alive for years while they crossed the street from him, and that the only thing wrong in the whole valley was a town that had spent 11 years fearing the kindest heart in it because it didn't care for the rapping. She stood by him, openly and without apology, and let the valley think what it liked. And then the fire came to Lawn Tree, and the valley learned, all at once and for itself, exactly what Lucas Caro was made of. It was market day, the town full, when the mercantile caught fire, went up fast and hot, with people still inside, the flames spreading to the buildings on either side before anyone rightly understood what was happening. There was screaming, and there was chaos, and there were folks trapped in the burning store, and the able-bodied men of Lawn Tree stood frozen at the edge of the heat the way people do, none of them willing to go into those flames, none of them but the scarred man. Lucas Caro had come to town that day. He came rarely, and only because Rachel had coaxed him. And when the mercantile went up with people inside, the man who knew better than any soul alive exactly what fire does to a body, the man who carried 11 years of it written on his own skin, the man with more reason than anyone in the world to fear those flames, Lucas Caro ran straight into them. He went into the burning building while braver-looking men stood frozen outside, and he brought people out, carried them out through the smoke and the flames, went back in, brought out more again and again, doing the one thing the whole valley had been certain the broken recluse could never be good for. He faced down the very thing that had ruined his life and taken his Ellen and scarred him into a monster in their eyes. And he faced it down to save the people who'd spent 11 years recoiling from him. He got every last soul out of that building alive, and he came staggering out of the smoke at the end, freshly burned and barely standing, and the whole town of Lawn Tree stood in the street and looked at the scarred man they'd feared and shunned for over a decade, and finally saw him. They saw what Rachel Wren had seen all along, not a monster, a hero, a man who ran into fire for strangers who'd never shown him a kindness, because running into fire for the people he could save was simply what kind of man he was and always had been, scars and silence and all. Rachel reached him first there in the smoke-filled street, and she took his burned face in her hands in front of the whole staring town, and she did not flinch, and she said, loud enough for every shamed soul in Lawn Tree to hear, "This is the man you said would die alone. This is the man you crossed the street from. He just walked into fire for every one of you. I've known what he was since the first day. It's about time the rest of you did too." The valley was never the same toward Lucas Caro after that day, and neither was Lucas. The town that had feared him came slowly and shamefacedly to honor him, the men he'd pulled from the fire foremost among them, but the others too, as the whole truth of him came out at last, the firewood and the mended fences, the 11 years of secret kindness, the story of Ellen and the fire that had scarred him. They had spent over a decade recoiling from the best man in the sweetgrass, and they knew it now, and there is a particular shame in a town that learns it judged a hero a monster for the shape of his face. But Lucas Caro, being who he was, carried no grudge about it. He'd never been bitter, whatever they'd assumed, only lonely, and grieving and walled off by 11 years of flinching. And the wall was down now, brought down by a widow who'd looked him in the eye, and a fire that had shown the valley his heart. Lucas Caro married Rachel Wren the following spring, his scarred hand in hers before the whole town that had once warned her away from him. And there was not a soul in Lawn Tree who came to that wedding who did not understand by then exactly how wrong they'd been and how right she'd been, and how close the valley had come to letting its finest man go to the lonely grave they'd all so confidently predicted. They had a long, good life together on the ridge, Lucas and Rachel, the scarred man who'd been certain he would die alone, and the widow who'd seen the man beneath the scars when no one else would even look. He was never silent with her. The voice the world had frozen for 11 years thawed entirely in the warmth of being truly seen, and there was laughter again in the house on the ridge, and love, and a man who'd thought all of that was burned out of him forever living to find it, was only buried and waiting for someone with the eyes to look past a ruined face and find it. Folks in the sweetgrass told the story for the rest of their days, usually as a warning to their children and themselves. Everybody in this valley said that man would die alone, the old-timers would say. Crossed the street from him, scared their young ones with him, wrote him off as a broken, bitter hermit for 11 years. And the whole time he was the kindest soul among us, leaving firewood at our doors in secret and asking nothing. Took a stranger, a widow with no reason to know better, to do the one thing none of us would. She looked him in the face and didn't flinch. She saw the man. They'd shake their heads. And then he ran into a burning building and carried half this town out of the fire, scars and all, face down the very thing that ruined him, to save the people who'd shunned him. We learned something that day we should have known all along. You never can tell a soul by the wrapping. The face this whole valley feared turned out to be the face of the bravest, most loving man any of us ever knew. We just hadn't the eyes to see it. Thank God somebody did, before we let him die alone the way we all so surely promised he would.